Welcome back. This video covers the first Visual Basic Lab Paycheck version 1.0. If you can, watch the video Introduction to Visual Basic before you watch this one. The purpose of this lab assignment is to figure out how to use the Visual Basic development system provided by Visual Studio so that you can enter in a Visual Basic program and make it work. I provided most of the stuff for you. I provided all of the Visual Basic code and the instructions and a layout for the lab report. Well, you need to do the rest. You need to enter the program and make it work, fill out the lab report, complete the lab report, and submit it using Moodle. This presentation is in 4 parts. The project definition, where we'll define how the project is supposed to be. We're going to implement the project in Visual Basic. We're going to test it, document it, and then submit it using Moodle. Visual Basic has 2 main modes of operation. There's the design mode and the run mode. You have to think of yourself as 2 separate people. In the design mode, you put all the things on the form, the buttons and the text boxes and the labels, and you want that form to look however it's going to look when somebody sits down and starts running the program. For example, there's text boxes which can be used for user input. So in the design mode, you want those to be empty. In the run mode, now all of a sudden you have to think of yourself as I am the person who is running the program. So all the form entries should be empty, and now you have to test out the program with different values and make sure that it comes up and produces the correct results. Part 1 is the project definition. Design a Windows form application in Visual Basic that does the following. Read the number of hours worked and the pay rate. Compute the pay rate, including overtime at time and a half, and display the gross pay, not including taxes or any other deductions. Maybe at some later date we'll add those in and make version 2. We need to develop the algorithm. This right here is called a hypo chart. Stands for hierarchical input, process, output. We need to input the hours and pay rate. The output is gross pay. So we need to figure out how to get from the input to the output. We're going to read the hours from the text box and convert to decimal, read pay rate from a text box and convert to decimal, determine the number of regular hours up to 40, determine the number of overtime hours, anything over 40, compute the regular pay, that's our regular hours times the pay rate. The overtime pay is the overtime hours times the pay rate times 1.5. The gross pay, we just add the regular pay plus the overtime pay, and then we need to display the gross pay. Before we get too far, let's draw a simple diagram of what the Visual Basic form should look like on the screen. At the top, I have a label that says Dan's Paycheck Calculator. Put your name there instead of mine, unless your name also happens to be Dan. I have a label and a text box for inputting the hours, another label and text box for inputting pay rate, and then a button that says compute. Below that, I'm using another label to display the paycheck amount. So each one of these is actually an object, and the form itself is another object. After I have created my form and put all those objects on the form, I want to input the code. Here's a sample of what the code could look like. Right at the top, there's a line that says private sub compute underscore click, and then there's a bunch of stuff after that. Depending on which version of Visual Basic you have, the stuff after that may be a little different. So whatever Visual Basic puts in, leave that alone and don't change it. We need to test the program with multiple inputs. I provided some for 39 hours, 40 hours, and 41 hours, and I just kept the pay rate at 20. You can use different numbers if you wish, but you have to make sure that you test at 40, below 40, and above 40, because 40 is one of those cutoff points, is where we could go either way. So you could do 39.9 hours or 40.1 hours, but make sure that you test at 40, below, and above. The last part is documentation. I've provided a lab report for you to fill out, and then you need to submit it for Moodle to get credit for the assignment. Here comes the fun part, implementation in Visual Basic. we need to start the Visual Basic program, place all the objects on the form, open the code window, and enter the title and the variables and the code. Then we need to test the program with multiple inputs. Although it may seem difficult to get your first Visual Basic program to work, it becomes much easier after you've done it a few times. Since this is your first Visual Basic program, the steps are very detailed. Make sure you read each of the directions carefully and don't move to the next step until you have completed the current step. Then, when you get it to work, congratulate yourself and give yourself a big pat on the back. Hey, go show it off and say, look what I did. At this point, we need to start Visual Basic. It could be under Microsoft Visual Studio. So if you don't have Visual Basic, go and get it before you proceed any further. There may be a free copy on the disk at the end of your book, or you can get a free copy of Microsoft Visual Basic Express Edition from the Microsoft website. Select New Project. In Visual Studio, make sure you select Visual Basic and Windows Forms application. Set the project name to Paycheck V1.0. Make sure you don't use any spaces in there, or you can choose a different name if you wish, but make sure it's descriptive. Then click the OK button. View the toolbox and properties. If the toolbox and properties windows are not visible, click the View and select Toolbox, and then also select Properties. You may need to click Other Windows on the pull-down menu to view some of these options. You can close any of the other windows that are part of Visual Basic, but make sure that you display Properties and not Property Manager. The listed properties can either be displayed by category or alphabetically. Select the alphabetic display to make it easier to follow the instructions in this lab assignment. So right there you can find the little button that says AZ with a down arrow and select that one. Drag the lower corner of the form to create more space on the form. Set the property text field to Paycheck version 1.0. Whatever you select in this field is going to show up in the title bar of your program when it's running. To place the title label on the form, select the Label tool. Draw a rectangular area on the form for the label that will be used for the title. Enter Paycheck Calculator in the text property field. Use your name, not mine. Click the font property and then click the small box with 3 dots in the font property. This will bring up the font dialog box. Set the font to bold, size 20. Next thing, we want to put a label and a text box for entering the number of hours. So select the Label tool, draw a rectangular area on the form for the label that will be used for the hours prompt. A prompt is an indication to the user they need to enter something. Then type in hours in the text property field. Then select the Text Box tool. Draw a rectangular area on the form next to the label for hours. This is where the user will be entering data. Make sure that you leave the contents of this text box blank. We want the user to fill it in when the program is running, not when the form is being designed. Do the same thing for pay rate. So we want a label and a text box for pay rate, and put those on the form. Now in the text property, you can leave a space, so you can say pay space rate. Next, we want to put a compute button on the form. So select the Button tool, draw a rectangular area on the form for the button, and enter Compute in the text property field. I'm going to use a label to display the paycheck amount. I want it to look on the form like a text box, but I really want to use a label. The reason is because if it's a text box, the user can go and modify the information. So I want to use a label. Select the Label tool, draw a rectangular area on the form for the label, and clear the text property field, meaning no text. I don't want any text to show in the paycheck amount. I want the program to put that information in. We can set the Paycheck Label properties so that it sort of looks like a text box. So scroll up until you can find the Auto Size property and set it to false, and set the Border Style property to Fixed 3D. Remember that the paycheck label will be used by the program to display the amount of the paycheck. Although setting the auto size and border style properties as requested may make the object look like a text box, a label should be used to prevent the user from entering text in this object when the program is running. Only the program should make changes to this part of the display. We want to give each object a meaningful name. When all these objects are created and placed on the form, Visual Basic just sort of makes up a name like Label 1, Label 2, Label 3, Text Box 1, Text Box 2, Text Box 3, Button 1, Button 2, Button 3. These aren't very meaningful. We'd like to have a name that makes sense for our program. For example, on that first label that it's using for title, I want to call it Title, but I would like to put LBL, title, with no spaces. That way I know it's a label. The second thing is for like the hours. I want LBL hours and TXT hours. So I can tell the difference between whether it's the label or the text box that's being used for the number of hours. The same thing for pay rate. For the button, BTN, compute, and for the last label, LBL, paycheck. I'll be using these names later in the program so that I can refer to them by their name. Let's start off by giving the form a name. So select the form. Just click on any area that's not being used. So you may have to scroll the properties window up to the top to find the name property and then put in FRM paycheck. FRM stands for form. To give each object a name, I want to select each object one at a time and change the object's name property according to the chart. A thin dotted line surrounds each object when it's selected. So you have to make sure that you've selected the correct object and not the form or something else. If you accidentally display the code window by double-clicking on an object, you can go back to the design window by clicking the Design tab. So make sure you give each object its name before proceeding. Now I want to open the code window. If you double-click the Compute button, another window opens up in Visual Basic. This is the code window. You can go back and forth between the code window and the design window by using the tabs on the top of the screen. Your code window should look something like this. It should start off with a public class and form, and then all the way at the bottom, end class. In the inside between those two lines, it should start off as private sub button compute underscore click and then some information after that, and then a space and then end sub. All of your code should be entered in between the private sub and the end sub. Don't mess around with any of those other lines before or above or after, or you may have to restart your project from the beginning again. For the program code, start off with a title block. Identify the name of the program, Paycheck version 1.0, and put your name there, not mine, the date that you typed it in and made the program work, the inputs, hours and pay rate, and the output is the paycheck. Declare the variables. Each variable starts off with dim, D-I-M. That's a throwback to the old basic days of declaring an array with a dim statement. So dim, hours as decimal, and then put a comment. Start off with a single quote, input value. Declare your inputs, all of the internal values you're going to be computing, and the value to be output. Here comes the real working part of the program. Input, process, output. For input, we're going to input the hours and the pay rate. Now, one of the things is that we're using text boxes and the data comes in as text, not numeric values. We want to convert that text into a decimal value and then store it into hours, and then convert the input for the pay rate into decimal and store it into the pay rate variable. Compute the regular and the overtime hours. Use an if-else statement. Compute the paycheck. To display the paycheck formatted as currency, start over here on the right hand side and look at paycheck. So paycheck is the variable that was computed by adding the regular and the overtime pay. I want to format that into currency, and also before displaying it I want to say your pay is space and then the ampersand, and then the computed amount. What I'm doing right here is taking two pieces of text and using the ampersand to combine them together. And then I want to store it into the text field of label paycheck. So LBL paycheck dot text identifies the text field of the label paycheck. If you've declared the name of a variable or an object one way and then try to use it with a slightly different variation in its name in your program, the two won't match up. As a programmer, you're going to be learning to type very carefully. Visual Basic helps identify names that don't match up. If something is underlined with a squiggly blue line, it probably didn't match up with a name somewhere else. So you need to fix those things before you try to run the program. Here comes the fun part, running the program. So go up to where it says debug and select run, or you can just press the F5 key. And then your program should run and you should see your form on the screen with empty text boxes. So go ahead and fill in some values into the text boxes like hours 40, pay rate 20, and press the compute button and see what happens. You should end up with $800. It should say your pay is $800. If it doesn't, you need to go back and fix it. Once you get that part to run, you need to verify that it works correctly with 39 hours and 40 hours and 41 hours. After you get that done, hey, all you need to do is document it and submit your work. I've provided a text document on Moodle that's mostly filled in. The lab report is a 2-page document. You need to complete the report that is shown in red. Save the file with a new name and submit your work on Moodle. You need to submit your work, not a copy of someone else's. I have ways of finding out if somebody is submitting somebody else's report, even if you put in your name on top. I don't catch them all, but I catch enough. So don't let that happen to you. The whole purpose of this is to learn how to do Visual Basic programming, and unfortunately a good part of programming is also documentation. So learn that part too. All of the lab reports should be submitted using Moodle. Find the correct submit link. This shouldn't be too bad at the beginning because this is your first lab assignment. You want the link that says Submit Your Paycheck version 1.0 Lab Report. Click on that one. Moodle should then load up a new screen with instructions showing a due date and an Add Submission button. Verify that you're submitting your report at the correct location, then click Add Submission. Choose the file to be submitted. The easiest way to submit your work is have a second window open and just drag a copy of your lab report into the area that has a big blue down arrow. Now, if you can't do that, you may have to click on the Files link on here and then go find it. Make sure you say Save Changes. So there's a little button there that says Save Changes. Moodle will then show the file that has been submitted. So if it shows up there as file submitted, then I can see the file and you'll receive credit on it when I grade your lab report. Now, if you want to go and update and resubmit your lab report before it's been graded, click the Edit Submissions button. Your old submission will be deleted and it will be replaced with the updated version. Congratulations on completing your first Visual Basic lab. Go show somebody and say, look what I did. You can always refer back to this lab assignment if you need instructions on how to work stuff with Visual Basic or on how to submit things using Moodle. So, congratulate yourself, give yourself a nice pat on the back and say, good work.